The first time my stepmother slapped me, I was 8 years old. The second time, I learned not to cry, because crying only gave her a reason to do it again. By the time I turned 18, I had become very good at silence, very good at lowering my eyes, very good at pretending I didn't hear the things people said when they thought I wasn't listening. Servant, charity case, worthless, father's mistake, I heard them all. And eventually, I stopped correcting them. The truth didn't matter anymore. Not after my father died. Not after my stepmother took everything. Not after my stepsister inherited the life that should have been mine. So I scrubbed floors, washed dishes, polished silver, and watched everyone else live. The funny thing about fate is that it doesn't care what people think. It doesn't care about lies buried for 18 years. It doesn't care about secrets hidden behind noble walls. And it definitely doesn't care about stepmothers. I learned that on the night of the moon selection ceremony, the night my stepmother's entire world collapsed, the night the moon goddess ignored every noble daughter in Silver Ridge territory and chose her servant instead. Welcome to MoonNoir. If you have ever been underestimated, this story is for you. If you have ever been told you were nothing, only to discover you were far more than anyone imagined, then stay with me. Because tonight, a servant becomes Luna, and the woman who stole her life is about to lose everything. Subscribe and like if this is your first time here. Let us begin. The Ashcroft estate stood on the highest hill in Silver Ridge territory. Visitors called it magnificent. White stone walls, towering windows, gardens that stretched for acres, crystal chandeliers, grand staircases. Everything about it announced wealth and power and status. To everyone else, it looked like a palace. To me, it looked like a prison, because while visitors admired the ballroom and the rose gardens, nobody saw the room beneath the kitchen. The room where I slept, a narrow bed, a wooden chest, one candle, no window, no sunlight, no view of the world outside. Just cold stone walls and silence. I lived there, not because there wasn't space upstairs. There were dozens of empty bedrooms in that house. I lived there because Vivian Ashcroft wanted me there. And in that house, what Vivian wanted became law. It hadn't always been that way. My father hadn't always allowed it. When he was alive, things were different. I still remembered pieces of it. Not clearly, like sunlight seen through fog, but enough. I remembered his laugh, his warm hands, the way he carried me on his shoulders during pack festivals, the way he called me his little moonbeam. Back then, I had my own room and my own dresses and my own future. Then my father died, and everything changed almost overnight. The funeral ended, the visitors left, and the woman who had spent years pretending to love me stopped pretending. I was 8 years old the night it happened. The memory has never left me. Not completely. Not the way the other memories from that year faded around the edges. This one stayed sharp. My father had been dead for 3 weeks. The house was still full of his absence. The particular absence of someone who had been everywhere and was suddenly nowhere. His chair at the dinner table, his coat on the hook by the door, his voice that used to fill the corridors in the evenings when he came home. All of it still there. All of it empty. That night, I came downstairs for dinner and did what I had always done. I set a place at the table for myself, the chair to the left of where my father used to sit. My chair, the one I'd sat in for as long as I could remember. I arranged the plate and the cutlery, carefully the way he had taught me. Then I sat down and waited for Vivian and Celine to come downstairs. Vivian entered first. She stopped when she saw me. Her gaze moved to my place setting, then back to my face. Something changed in her expression. Something that had been waiting behind the performance of grief and patience and stepmother warmth. Finally showing itself. She crossed to the table, she picked up my plate, my cutlery, my glass, and carried them to the kitchen. I watched her do it, not understanding yet, still too young to understand. She came back and stood beside my chair. Servants eat in the kitchen. I looked up at her. I'm not a servant. Her expression didn't change. Go to the kitchen, Lyra. I shook my head. Father always lets me sit here. The slap came before I finished the sentence. Not hard enough to leave a mark that anyone would notice. Vivienne was always careful about that. Hard enough that I understood immediately what had just changed. The chair scraped back. I stood. I walked to the kitchen. I did not cry. I ate alone at the small table beside the cold stove, while their voices drifted through from the dining room. Celine's laughter, Vivienne's measured responses, the sound of silverware against good plates. That was the first night. There were 2,190 more after it before the moon goddess intervened. I counted. The night before the moon selection ceremony, the Ashcroft estate hosted a formal dinner. 20 noble guests. The finest silverware, the most expensive wine. Every detail perfect. Vivienne had spent weeks preparing for it. Because appearances mattered more to her than anything else. That afternoon, I was sent to the market to collect the last of the supplies. Herbs, candles, 2 bottles of imported wine that Vivienne had ordered specially. The market was busy with ceremony preparations, silver banners going up on every building, merchants rearranging their stalls, children running between the legs of adults who were too excited about tomorrow to notice them. I moved through it with my basket, head down, doing what I had learned to do in public spaces. Taking up as little room as possible, being noticed by nobody. Then the crowd shifted, parted, the way crowds parted for certain people without being asked. I looked up. Alpha Cassian Thornwolf moved through the square with 2 members of his guard, flanking him at a respectful distance. He was taller than I expected, broader, the kind of presence that changed the atmosphere of a space simply by entering it. He wasn't performing authority. He simply had it, the way certain people did, naturally, without effort. He was passing directly beside me when it happened. His gaze moved across the market, the way a person's gaze moved when they were checking a space out of habit, and for 1 second it landed on me. Not because I was notable, not because of anything I had done. Simply because I was there, and he was looking, and his eyes passed over my face the way eyes passed over faces in a crowd. Except they didn't immediately move on. For 1 second, they stayed. I looked away first. When I looked back, he was already gone. Moving through the square, the crowd closing behind him. As though he had never been there at all. I stood with my basket and my herbs and my 2 bottles of imported wine, and told myself it meant nothing, because it didn't. Men like that did not notice girls like me, not in any way that mattered. I picked up my basket and went back to work, and only allowed myself to think about it once more on the walk home, which I considered a significant exercise in self-discipline. That evening, I spent 4 hours in the kitchen before the guests arrived, preparing food I would not eat, setting tables I would not sit at, polishing glasses I would not drink from. When the guests finally arrived, I stood near the kitchen doorway, in my gray servant dress, waiting for instructions, trying to be invisible. Vivienne glided into the room in an emerald gown. She looked extraordinary. She always did. Celine followed her, silver silk, perfect curls. The daughter everyone adored. The guests immediately surrounded them. Laughter and compliments filled the room. Then one of the noble women noticed me. She turned to Vivienne. "Who is that girl?" Vivienne barely glanced in my direction. "Nobody important. She serves the household." The woman nodded and immediately returned her attention to Celine. "Nobody important." 2 words. I had heard variations of them for 6 years. They never stopped landing. For the next 2 hours, I carried trays through the dining room, refilling glasses, collecting dishes, moving silently between guests who looked through me the way people looked through furniture. At one point, I passed directly behind Celine's chair. She was in conversation with a visiting noblewoman who had leaned toward her with the curiosity of someone gathering information. Who was the girl in the gray dress? Celine paused, just long enough to be noticed. Then she smiled. The gracious smile, the one Vivian had taught her. Oh, that's just Lyra. Her voice was warm and slightly pitying in the way that made people believe they were being confided in. My mother has such a generous heart. She takes in strays. The noblewoman made a sympathetic sound. How kind. Celine nodded. The Ashcrofts have always believed in charity. She caught my eye across the room, held it for 1 second. Not cruel, not kind, simply aware. Then she turned back to her conversation. That 1 second stayed with me longer than anything else that evening, because cruelty, I understood. That 1 second was something more complicated, something that understood exactly what it was doing. Later, when the guests had moved to the sitting room, I began clearing the dining table alone. Vivian entered. She surveyed the room the way a general surveyed a battlefield. Then her eyes found a small water stain on the tablecloth near where I had been working. She crossed to it, pressed one finger against it, then looked at me. 6 years, she said quietly. She always spoke quietly when she was at her most dangerous. 6 years I have given you a home. A pause. And you cannot manage a tablecloth. I'm sorry. The apology came automatically. Vivian's expression didn't change. The guests leave at midnight. You will have this room spotless before you sleep. Yes, ma'am. She left without another word. I looked at the stain. It was barely visible. I could have argued that. I cleaned it instead. Then I cleaned everything else. And I didn't sleep until nearly 2 a.m. Near the end of the evening, a younger servant girl knocked a tray near the kitchen doorway as she rushed past. Dishes scattered across the stone floor. The girl froze. Her face went pale. Vivian was in the next room. The sound had been loud. I crossed to her before anyone else could react. I crouched and began collecting the dishes quickly and quietly. The girl stared at me. I looked up at her. Go. I'll manage this. She hesitated. Go, I said again. She went. I collected every piece and carried the tray back to the kitchen and said nothing to anyone. Nobody thanked me. Nobody noticed. That was fine. It wasn't done to be noticed. It was done because she was scared, and I remembered what scared felt like, and I had the ability to help, and so I did. That was all. The next day was the ceremony. By noon, the estate was buzzing with preparations. Celine was being dressed by 3 attendants. Her gown had been specially commissioned, deep silver silk, intricate embroidery, a crown of white flowers arranged in her golden hair. She looked like everything people expected a Luna to look like. I passed her doorway, carrying a basket of linens. She saw me in the mirror. Lyra? I stopped. Yes. Have my silver shoes been cleaned? I checked them this morning. They're ready. She turned back to her reflection. Make sure my bath is drawn for this evening, after the ceremony. Yes. She paused. Actually, her voice shifted slightly. Draw it now. I set down the basket. It's still morning. She looked at me in the mirror, not with cruelty, with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been told no by someone like me. Now, Lyra. I drew the bath and carried the linens afterward. That afternoon, Vivian found me in the corridor. She looked me over once. That dress is unacceptable. The gray servant dress. The only one I had. I know you won't be attending the ceremony, she said, but guests will arrive at the estate beforehand. I held her gaze. Waiting. Find something less conspicuous. I looked down at the dress. This is the only one I have. Vivian studied me. Then she smiled. Not warmly, never warmly. Then stay out of sight. She walked away. I stood in the corridor for a moment. Staying out of sight was something I'd been doing for 6 years. I was quite good at it by now. Then I went back to work. That evening, while Celine dressed for destiny and Vivienne rehearsed her triumphant smile, I sat alone in the kitchen eating a bowl of cold soup. The family was dining upstairs. The good dishes, the warm food, the candles, and the conversation. I ate alone at the kitchen table with one lamp and the sound of their laughter drifting down from above. This was my life. This was what 6 years of careful cruelty had made of it. And I had learned to carry it quietly because there was simply no other option. Outside Silver Ridge territory was already celebrating. Silver banners fluttered in the evening wind. Torches illuminated every street. Music drifted through the air. Thousands of wolves were moving toward the central square, preparing for the selection, preparing for history, preparing to witness the birth of a new Luna. I washed my bowl, dried it, put it away, and went back to work. That night, sleep refused to come. Not that it ever stayed long in the basement. The stone walls trapped the cold. The silence trapped the thoughts. And my thoughts had become louder than usual. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the wooden chest in the corner. On top of it sat a small carved box. Old. Locked. My father had given it to me the week before he died. He had placed it in my hands and held them closed around it and looked at me with an expression I hadn't understood then and still didn't fully understand now. "Keep this safe," he said. "Don't open it until you're ready." I had been 12 years old. I had asked him what ready meant. He had smiled. "You'll know." 6 years later, I still didn't know. The box sat on the chest, waiting, the same way it had waited every night since he died. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. The wood was smooth from years of handling. Whatever was inside shifted very slightly when I tilted it. Small, light, a letter perhaps, or something smaller. I put it back. Not yet. Whatever ready meant I hadn't arrived there yet. Then voices upstairs pulled me from my thoughts. Late-night voices, arguments. Rare in this house. Very rare. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly climbed the stairs. The voices grew clearer. One belonged to Vivienne, the other to a man I didn't recognize. "You promised me this would never happen." Vivienne sounded angry. "No, not angry. Afraid." "It won't happen," the man replied. "You said that before." A pause. Then Vivienne lowered her voice. "If anyone discovers who she is, everything falls apart." My heart skipped. Who she is. The stranger sighed. 18 years is a long time, Vivienne. "Not long enough. You're taking a risk. I don't have a choice." I hurried back downstairs before anyone could catch me listening. Once inside my room, I sat on the edge of my bed. My pulse refused to slow. Who was Vivienne talking about? And why did she sound terrified? My eyes moved to the carved box on the chest. I thought about my father's face when he gave it to me. The expression I hadn't understood. For the first time in 6 years, I wondered if the box and Vivienne's fear were connected. I didn't open it. Not yet, but I held it for a long time in the dark before I finally slept. By the time I was carrying laundry across the courtyard that evening, the ceremony had already begun. I could hear the distant crowd, the music, the anticipation. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't care. Then I felt it. A sudden warmth spread through my chest. Not painful, not frightening, something deeper than both. The basket slipped slightly in my arms. My heartbeat quickened. The air felt different, charged, almost alive, as though invisible threads had wrapped around me and begun pulling, gently, persistently, toward one direction. The central square, the ceremony, the moonstone. I told myself this was ridiculous. I wasn't supposed to be there. Vivienne had made that very clear. The pull strengthened. I stood in the courtyard with my laundry basket and thought about it seriously for approximately 4 seconds. Then I put the basket down. If the moon goddess herself was going to the trouble of pulling me across half the territory on a ceremony night, the least I could do was show up. I straightened my dress, and I chose to go. The central square overflowed with wolves. Noble families filled the front rows. Warriors lined the perimeter. Children sat on shoulders. Thousands had gathered beneath the moonlight. At the center stood the moonstone, ancient, sacred, silver beneath the light. Alpha Cassian Thornwolf stood beside it. I recognized him immediately from the market, taller in formal wear. More contained, the same presence, the same quality of authority that changed the atmosphere of a space simply by entering it. He was scanning the crowd with the careful attention of someone responsible for everything in it. One by one, eligible women approached the stone. Each touched it, each waited, each hoped. Nothing happened. The first candidate stepped away disappointed, then another, then another. 10 girls. Nothing. 20 girls. Nothing. The crowd remained calm. Celine still hadn't gone. High above the square on the noble balcony, Vivienne stood with her arms folded, smiling, confident, certain. Everything was going according to plan. It always did. Finally, the herald called Celine Ashcroft. The square erupted. Cheers rolled through the crowd like thunder. Celine descended the balcony stairs slowly, gracefully, the silver gown catching every torch and every moonbeam. She looked exactly like what everyone expected the future Luna to look like. She reached the altar and placed her hand on the moonstone, then smiled, waiting for destiny to confirm what she already knew. Nothing happened. The smile disappeared. Silence spread through the square. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. For the first time all evening, fear entered Vivienne Ashcroft's eyes, because she knew something nobody else did. And suddenly, she realized her secret might not stay buried. Then the moonstone flashed. A burst of silver light exploded from its center. The crowd gasped. Alpha Cassian turned sharply. The light vanished, then appeared again. Brighter, stronger. Confused voices spread through the square. What was that? Did you see it? The stone reacted. I took a step backward. The moonstone blazed again. This time, every eye followed its glow. Straight toward me. My stomach dropped. No, 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 no. The crowd began parting instinctively, creating a clear path through thousands of wolves, a path leading directly to the altar and directly to me. Silence settled over the square. Heavy. Absolute. I wanted to disappear. Then Alpha Cassian spoke. You. My breath caught. Step forward. I looked around. Surely he meant someone else. His silver eyes locked onto mine. Something passed through them. Not recognition exactly. Something adjacent to it. The specific look of a man connecting two moments that had seemed unrelated until now. You. Come forward. The entire crowd turned toward me. On the balcony, Vivienne stood frozen, horror filling her face. Pure horror. No. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. The crowd looked toward her, confused. Vivienne immediately forced a smile. Too late. She's only a servant. The moment she spoke, the moonstone exploded with light. The crowd gasped. Even Cassian looked surprised. The stone seemed to be answering her. Disagreeing. Come forward, Cassian repeated. My legs moved before my brain caught up. Every step felt impossible. Thousands of eyes followed me. My servant dress, my worn shoes, my hair pinned up hastily while I was doing laundry. When I finally reached the altar, my hands were shaking. The moonstone glowed brighter than ever. Cassian stood beside it, close now, his expression unreadable. Place your hand on the stone. I stared at it. Its surface shimmered beneath the moonlight. Almost alive. My heart pounded. I don't think this is a good idea. A few people laughed nervously. Cassian didn't. Place your hand on the stone. Slowly, I obeyed. The instant my fingers touched the surface, the world exploded. Silver light burst across the square, across the rooftops, across the mountains surrounding Silver Ridge. The crowd screamed. Moonlight swirled around me, wrapped around me, danced through my hair and across my skin. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then a voice echoed through the square. Ancient, powerful, female, the voice of the moon goddess. The true Luna has been found. Silence. Absolute silence. Then chaos erupted. People shouted, cried, stared. Celine looked shattered. Vivienne looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. And standing at the center of it all was me. The servant. The girl everyone ignored. The girl everyone underestimated. The girl my stepmother spent 18 years trying to erase. I looked out at thousands of shocked faces and thought only one thing. Vivienne was going to be absolutely furious. Then an elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. Slowly, carefully, leaning on a cane. Elder Mira, keeper of Silver Ridge history. Tears filled her eyes the moment she saw me. She approached the altar and looked directly into my face and whispered the sentence that would destroy Vivienne Ashcroft forever. She has her mother's eyes. The color drained from Vivienne's face because the truth she had buried for 18 years was finally coming back to life. The silence after Elder Mira's declaration lasted only 3 seconds. Then the square erupted. Thousands of voices, thousands of questions, thousands of wolves trying to understand what they had just witnessed. I stood frozen. The rightful heir, the Vale bloodline. I had spent 18 years believing I was nobody, a servant, a burden, an afterthought. Now an entire territory was staring at me like I mattered. It felt impossible. Alpha Cassian raised his hand, and the crowd immediately quieted. What exactly are you saying, Elder? Mira swallowed. I am saying her mother was Aurora Vale. The crowd gasped. Even Cassian's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough, because everyone knew that name. Aurora Vale, the last Luna descendant. The woman whose bloodline carried the moon goddess's blessing. The woman who disappeared nearly 2 decades ago. My breath caught. My mother. Nobody ever spoke about her. Not after my father died. Not after Vivienne took control. Questions about my mother had always been dismissed, ignored, punished. Now suddenly everyone seemed to know more about her than I did. That's impossible. Vivienne's voice cracked across the square. Aurora died years ago. Then the bloodline ended. No. Mira looked directly at me. It survived. She pointed. It's standing right there. The crowd erupted again, and for the first time in years, Vivienne looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not annoyed, afraid. I noticed. And suddenly, a terrible question entered my mind. Why? What else had she hidden? My hand went to the pocket of my dress, where I'd placed the carved wooden box before leaving the estate that evening. I hadn't known why I brought it. Now I thought perhaps I did. The investigation began immediately. Cassian led it personally. He interviewed former servants first, then records clerks, then pack elders who remembered things they had been told to forget. On the second day, he came to find me. I was in the corridor outside the council chambers when he appeared. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said 2 words I hadn't expected. Show me. I frowned. Show you what? Where you slept. Something cold moved through me. Why? His expression didn't change. Because I want to see it. I didn't argue. Something in his voice made it clear that arguing wasn't the point. I led him through the palace corridors and down to the lower level and through the door beneath the kitchen and down the narrow staircase. He followed without speaking. When we reached the bottom, I pushed open the door. The room was exactly as I had left it. The narrow bed, the wooden chest, the candle stub on the windowless ledge, the bare stone walls, the particular cold of underground air that never fully left regardless of the season. Cassian stood in the doorway. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply looked at it. for a long time. I watched his face, the controlled expression he always wore in public. The carefully maintained stillness of someone who had learned that showing emotion in his position carried consequences. I watched it crack. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in stories, simply the way composure actually cracked in real people, quietly, in the jaw, in the way his hands closed at his sides, in the specific quality of the silence that followed. 6 years. He said it quietly. Yes. He looked at the candle stub, at the chest, at the single blanket on the narrow bed. Then he turned. He walked back up the stairs without another word. I followed. When we reached the corridor, he stopped. His back was to me for a moment, then he turned around. His expression was controlled again. Almost. Not entirely. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. I would like to understand something. His voice was very quiet. Yes. How many people knew? I thought about Dessa, the kitchen servant, Lady Corin, who attended 12 dinners, the records clerk, the neighbors who had watched me carry water from the well in January. All of them. None of them. Both things simultaneously. People knew, I said. They chose not to look directly at it. Something crossed his face. Something I hadn't seen there before. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than anger and more dangerous. That changes, he said. He said it simply. As a fact. Not a promise. A fact. Then he walked away down the corridor, and I stood in the basement doorway and understood that something had shifted. Not just in him, in the entire trajectory of what came next. The trial was held in the Great Hall. Every senior pack member attended. Nobody wanted to miss it. Not after the Luna reveal. Not after the ceremony. Not after 4 days of investigation that had spread through Silver Ridge, like the truth always spread, when it had been suppressed long enough. Quickly and completely. Vivienne was brought in by 2 warriors. She walked between them with her head high, still performing composure. Still wearing the expression of a woman who believed she could talk her way out of anything. She had done it before. For 18 years, she had done it. She stopped when she saw me seated beside Cassian at the council table. Something flickered across her face. Gone immediately. But I saw it. The council elder opened the proceedings. Documents were presented, read aloud. Witnesses called forward. One by one. The first was a former kitchen servant named Dessa. She was 40 years old, and she stood before the council and spoke quietly. I worked at the estate for 3 years. The girl was treated differently from the first day. She was not given meals with the family. She ate in the kitchen. She was not given a proper room. She slept in the basement. She was not permitted to attend school with other noble children. When I tried to speak to Lady Ashcroft about it, once she told me it was none of my concern, and the following week I was dismissed without reference. The hall murmured. The second witness was an elderly records clerk named Ferris. He had worked in the Silver Ridge documentation office for 30 years. He was trembling slightly when he stood. I was approached by Lady Ashcroft 6 years ago. She gave me a document. She asked me to file it under a different name. I did. He swallowed. She paid me to. He looked at me briefly. I'm sorry, I should have refused. The third witness surprised the entire hall. Celine Ashcroft. Nobody had expected her to come forward, least of all me. She walked to the witness position alone, without her mother's instruction, without anyone beside her. She stood before the council and the assembled territory, and she spoke. Her voice was steady. My mother did this. A pause. Not Lyra, not anyone else. My mother took her inheritance. My mother confined her to the basement. My mother told me Lyra was a charity case. She swallowed. I believed her. Another pause. I should have asked more questions. Her jaw tightened. I didn't, and I am ashamed of that. The hall was completely silent. Then Celine looked directly at Vivienne. What you did was wrong. Her voice didn't waver. And I won't stand beside it. Vivienne stared at her daughter. For the first time in the proceedings, she looked genuinely shaken. Not by the evidence, not by the witnesses, by Celine. The judgment came 20 minutes later. Vivienne Ashcroft was stripped of everything. Her titles, her authority, her estate, her influence, exile, permanent. The hall erupted. Some wolves cheered. Some sat in silence. Some looked at me with expressions that held something I hadn't seen directed toward me in 6 years. Shame. Vivienne's eyes found mine as the warriors moved to escort her out. Hatred burned there. But beneath it, something I hadn't expected. Something small. Regret. Or maybe simply the specific grief of a woman who had spent 18 years winning and had just discovered that winning and being right were not the same thing. She was escorted out of the Great Hall, and the chapter closed. Cassian said nothing as we walked back through the palace corridors afterward. Neither did I. We simply walked. And the silence felt like the first truly honest silence I had ever shared with another person. 3 weeks before the Luna Ascension, a messenger arrived. Vivienne wanted to see me, alone. Cassian opposed it immediately. No. I looked at him. No. He crossed his arms. That woman spent 18 years making your life miserable. I can't argue with that. Then, stay away from her. I thought about it for 3 days. Then, I made my own decision. I would go. Vivienne's exile cottage stood near the territory's southern border. Small, plain, nothing like the mansion she once ruled. The woman who opened the door barely resembled the elegant socialite I remembered. She looked older, tired, defeated, as though the performance had finally cost more than she had left to spend on it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vivienne stepped aside. "Come in." The room was clean but sparse. 1 chair, 1 table. A single window looking out at the gray afternoon. Nothing on the walls. No mirrors. I noticed the absence of mirrors immediately. We sat across from each other. The silence between us felt heavy. Years of pain sitting in the space where words should have been. Finally, I asked the question I had always wanted to ask. Why did you hate me? Vivienne looked away. For a long moment, she said nothing. When the answer came, it surprised both of us. I didn't hate you. I laughed. A short sound. That's difficult to believe. Vivienne closed her eyes. I hated what you represented. She stared at the table. Before your father met Aurora, I loved him. Her voice was quiet, flat, the voice of someone stating a fact they had carried alone for a very long time. He chose her. And after she died, I thought I had finally won. A bitter pause. Then you arrived, and every time I looked at you, I saw the woman he loved more than me. The words hung in the room. The confession felt ugly, pathetic, human. I sat with it for a moment, then I said the thing that surprised even me. You could have just ignored me. Vivienne looked up. I know. Then why didn't you? She looked at the window. Because ignoring you meant admitting you existed, and admitting you existed meant admitting he never stopped loving her. I understood. Not excused, not forgiven, but understood. Vivienne's cruelty had never truly been about me. It had been about jealousy and bitterness and the specific grief of someone who loved the wrong person and spent 18 years trying to make someone else pay for it. When I left the cottage, I felt strangely lighter. Not because she deserved peace, but because carrying hatred was exhausting, and I was very tired of carrying things that didn't belong to me. Celine came to find me a week after her mother's exile. I was in the palace gardens when I heard footsteps. She looked different from the girl who had extended her glass backward, without looking up. The confidence was still there, but something beneath it had changed. Something had been removed. She stopped a few feet away. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then she said, I came to apologize. I waited. She swallowed. For all of it. A pause, for believing her. Another pause. For treating you like you were less. The words sounded genuine, painfully genuine. I studied her face. For years, I had watched Celine perform every emotion required of her. The gracious smile, the delighted laugh, the appropriate concern. She had learned them all from Vivian. But this wasn't performance. This was something she clearly didn't know how to do yet. Something she was attempting for the first time. She was raised on the same lies, I reminded myself. She was manipulated too. She had been standing in a place she believed was hers, because the woman who raised her told her it was. I stepped aside from the garden path. Would you like to sit for a moment? Celine looked surprised, then nodded. We sat on a bench beneath a flowering tree. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Celine said something I didn't expect. I don't know who I am without her version of me. I looked at her. She was staring at the flowers. Her expression was the most honest I had ever seen on her face. I think that's the best place to start, I said. She looked at me, not knowing. For a long time afterward, neither of us said anything. But the silence felt different from before. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say. The silence of two people beginning something they didn't yet have words for. Life changed quickly after Vivian's exile. Too quickly. 1 week earlier, I had been scrubbing floors. Now, servants bowed when I entered rooms. Nobles greeted me respectfully. People moved aside when I walked past. The change felt strange, uncomfortable. Sometimes I still expected someone to hand me a mop. Old habits were very hard to break, especially after 6 years. One afternoon, I escaped to the palace gardens hoping for quiet. The roses were beginning to bloom. Sunlight filtered through the trees. For the first time in forever, nobody was demanding anything from me. I sat on a bench and simply breathed. Then footsteps approached. Cassian. The Alpha stopped beside me. Are you hiding? I considered denying it. Yes. He sat down beside me without being invited. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Cassian looked at the roses. The estate gardens are being restored to the original records. He said it quietly, like it was information I might want. What does that mean? He looked at me. They were your mother's gardens. Your father commissioned them after she died. Vivian changed them. I stared at the roses, the deep red ones along the south wall. I used to tend them, I know. The silence that followed felt different from the others. More careful, more deliberate. Then Cassian said something that surprised me. You have been apologizing less. I thought about it. He was right. I think I'm learning when it's necessary and when it's just habit. He nodded. What changed? I looked at him. Someone pointed it out. A faint smile crossed his face. Good advice. The smile was brief, but it transformed his face completely. For a moment, he looked less like an alpha and more like a person who smiled rarely and meant it when he did. I found myself looking longer than I should, then quickly looked away. From the corner of my vision, I noticed him do the same. Neither of us mentioned it, but something had shifted in the garden that afternoon. Something small, something that had no name yet, something that would... 3 days later, Elder Mira requested a private meeting. She held a small carved box, the same box my father had given me. I stared at it. How do you have that? Mira sat down. Your father left it with me 12 years ago. He gave you a copy to keep safe. A pause. This one contains the key. I looked at the box in her hands, then at the one I'd carried from the basement. 2 identical boxes. 2 halves of the same thing. My father had planned for this moment, had known it might come, had trusted Mira to hold one piece of it until the other piece was ready. My hands were not entirely steady when I took both boxes and pressed them together. The lock mechanism was hidden in the join between them. One box alone could never open. Only together. Inside lay a single folded letter. The handwriting was instantly familiar. His handwriting. Tears blurred my vision before I finished the first line. My little moonbeam. If you are reading this, then something extraordinary has happened, which means I was right, and it means your mother was right too. There are truths I wanted to tell you myself, but some truths become dangerous when spoken too soon. If the moon goddess has chosen you, then you deserve the answers I couldn't give before. You were never ordinary, Lyra. You were never meant to live in shadows, and no matter what anyone told you, you were always worthy. Tears slipped down my cheeks. For 18 years I had needed those words. And now I was hearing them too late, and not too late simultaneously. The final line nearly broke me. I hope when you read this, you finally know who you are, because I never forgot, and neither did your mother. I cried for a long time after that, not because I was sad, because for the first time since losing him, I felt loved again. That evening, Cassian found me on a balcony overlooking the territory. He stood beside me without speaking. Then I handed him the letter. He read it carefully, slowly. When he finished, he returned it, without a word. Then, he looked at the moon for a long time. Finally, he said, "He was right about you." I looked at him. He looked back. You were never ordinary. I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I simply looked at the moon alongside him and let it be there. The Luna Ascension preparations consumed the territory. Decorations filled the streets. Banners hung from every building. Silver Ridge was preparing for its first true Luna in generations. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except me. I felt terrified. One afternoon, I escaped to the training grounds hoping for peace. Instead, I found Cassian, sparring with 2 senior warriors. He was faster than both of them, by a significant margin. He noticed me and lowered his training sword. The warriors wisely disappeared. "You look troubled." I sighed. Everyone keeps staring at me. He considered that. "You're Luna. That doesn't help." Cassian laughed. It was a real laugh, brief and quiet, the kind that arrived without warning. No, I suppose it doesn't. A breeze swept through the training field. A strand of hair fell across my face. Without thinking, Cassian reached forward and tucked it behind my ear. The world stopped. Both of us went completely still. The gesture was small, innocent, yet suddenly, neither of us seemed capable of moving. Our eyes met, held, something shifted, something undeniable. Cassian stepped back first, creating distance. Necessary distance. The moment broke. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us pretended it hadn't happened. Because some moments change everything, even when nothing actually happens. 3 days before the Luna Ascension, the council finished early. Everyone filed out. Cassian remained at the table with his papers. I remained in my chair for reasons I didn't fully examine. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that arrived when a space emptied of everything except 2 people, and the awareness of each other that neither of them was performing. Cassian looked up. "You're still here." I looked at my own papers. "So are you." He almost smiled. "I have reports." "I have nothing," I admitted. A pause. "Then why are you still here?" I thought about it. I wasn't sure how to answer honestly without answering too much. Finally, I said, "I'm not ready to go back to my room yet." He looked at me. "Why not?" I looked at the window, at the moon beginning to rise over Silver Ridge. Because in my room, I think too much. About before. About everything that happened. About the basement. About my father. About all of it. A pause. Out here, it's quieter. In here, I mean. I touched my chest briefly, then felt immediately self-conscious about it. Cassian said nothing for a moment, then he set his papers down. He stood. He crossed to the window and stood beside it, looking out. I know that feeling. His voice was quiet. I looked at him. "You do." He nodded. "After my father died and I became alpha at 19. He paused. The nights were very long for a long time. I hadn't known that about him. Nobody talked about the alpha the way they talked about ordinary people. His losses, his long nights. The 19-year-old boy who became responsible for an entire territory and had to figure out what to do with grief while doing it. "How did you manage it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I kept working. A pause. It wasn't healthy, but it was what I had. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. We stood in the quiet council room while the moon rose outside, not talking about the ascension, not talking about the territory, not performing anything for anyone. Simply two people who had both learned to carry things alone. Discovering that carrying them beside someone else felt different. At some point, Cassian looked at me. "You should sleep." "I know." Neither of us moved immediately. Then I stood, gathered my things, walked to the door. I stopped in the doorway. "Thank you." "For what?" I thought about it. "For staying." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I walked back to my room, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't think too much. I simply slept. The day finally arrived. Silver Ridge had never looked more beautiful. Every street overflowed with flowers. Every building displayed silver banners. Music echoed throughout the territory. Thousands gathered in the central square, waiting, watching, celebrating. Unlike the moon selection ceremony, I wasn't standing in the back anymore. Today, I stood at the center, where everyone could see me. As I approached the altar, memories flooded through me. The basement room, the narrow bed, the single candle, the bare stone walls, the cold soup eaten alone in the kitchen, while laughter drifted down from above. The first time my stepmother slapped me, I had been 8 years old. All of it had led here. The same square, the same moon, the same people, yet everything had changed. Elder Mira placed the ceremonial crown upon a velvet cushion. The crowd became silent. Then the old historian smiled and spoke. Lyra Vale. A pause. Hidden heir of the Vale bloodline. Another pause. Chosen of the moon goddess. Tears filled my eyes. I almost couldn't accept it. Not because I doubted it, because for 18 years I had been told I was nothing. And nothing doesn't simply become Luna overnight. It takes a moment to understand that the nothing was always a lie. That underneath it, something had been waiting. Patient, certain, real. I took a breath, and I accepted the crown. Silver light burst across the altar. The moonstone glowed brilliantly. And across the square, wolves began to kneel. Not because protocol required it, because they chose to. One by one, then in rows, then in thousands. The entire territory kneeling before the girl who had carried their trays and scrubbed their floors and eaten alone in a kitchen basement for 6 years. The entire territory choosing her. I stood in the moonlight and let myself feel it. All of it. The joy and the grief and the exhaustion and the love and the 18 years of everything that had been required to arrive at this exact moment. All of it simultaneously. Real. Then I heard a voice behind me. Cassian. Quiet enough that only I could hear. 6 years earlier, Vivienne told someone in this territory that you were nobody important. A pause. Tonight, every wolf in Silver Ridge is on their knees. I turned to look at him. He was watching me with the expression he had worn the night in the council room. Simply present. Without performance, without distance. Simply there. The crowd erupted into cheers. Thousands of voices. Thousands of wolves rising to their feet. Not a servant. Not a charity case. Not forgotten. Luna. The celebrations continued long into the night. Music filled the streets. Laughter echoed through Silver Ridge. But eventually I slipped away. The attention was exhausting. I found refuge on a quiet balcony overlooking the territory. For a while, I simply stood there watching the moon, thinking about everything. Then I heard footsteps. Cassian. The Alpha stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable, safe. The same silence from the council room. The same quality of two people who had stopped needing to fill space with anything other than what was actually there. Finally, Cassian exhaled. "There's something I need to tell you." Something in his voice made my heart race. Cassian held my gaze. For once, the fearless Alpha looked uncertain, which somehow made the moment more important than anything that had come before it. "I've fought rogues." A pause. "Led warriors." Another pause. "Faced enemies stronger than me. None of that has ever scared me." Silence. "But this does." My breath caught. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch me, just enough to make everything else disappear. "I love you." The words hung between us. Simple. Honest. Perfect. For a second, I couldn't breathe, because deep down I had hoped, but hearing it was different. Hearing it made it real. The Alpha swallowed. "If you don't feel the same," I kissed him. 1 year later, the gardens behind Alpha Hall were peaceful. Flowers bloomed, birds sang, the territory thrived. I sat beneath a flowering tree, reading while Cassian approached carrying 2 cups of tea. A simple moment, a normal moment, the kind I once believed I would never have. He sat beside me. I leaned into him automatically, comfortably, naturally. Home. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, I looked toward the moon, rising above Silver Ridge, and remembered. The basement, the loneliness, the slap when I was 8 years old, the cold soup eaten alone while laughter drifted down from above. The gray dress that was the only one I had. Nobody important. Back then, I believed my story was ending. I was wrong. It was only beginning. Because fate doesn't care what people call you. Servant, charity case, worthless, nobody important. Fate only cares about the truth. And the truth was simple. The servant girl had always been Luna. The world just needed time to discover it. Cassian wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I smiled. Not because life was perfect, not because the past disappeared, but because I had finally found what every lonely child hopes for, a place to belong. And at last, I was home. Take a moment with that. Then tell me which moment got you. The first time my stepmother slapped me, I was 8 years old. Servants eat in the kitchen. Nobody important, the quiet servant who helped the girl who dropped the tray. Cassian passing through the market. Their eyes meeting for 1 second. The moonstone reacting when she walked in. She's only a servant, the stone exploding with light. The true Luna has been found. She has her mother's eyes. Show me. And Cassian standing in the basement doorway. Why do you keep saying sorry? Because it used to keep me safe. Celine standing before the council. My mother did this. Not Lyra, 2 boxes, 1 key, 1 letter. You are never ordinary, Lyra? For staying. Tonight, every wolf in Silver Ridge is on their knees. I love you. Tell me which one. I read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, no matter how long they bury you, the right person always finds their way home. MoonNoir.